Welcome back to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. Many Oregonians like to think of the state as environmentally friendly, a green state. But in reality, that might not be the case. In a four-part series, Polluted by Money, the Oregonian examined the effect of unlimited campaign contributions and corporate cash on the state's environmental policies. And it found Oregon is coming up short when it comes to protecting the environment and citizens' health. Here to tell us more, welcome to my guest, the Oregonian reporter behind this investigation, Rob Davis. Rob, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
This was really an eye-opening investigation. What went into this investigation?
About 18 months of work, exclusively digging into our regulatory agencies, lawmakers. We got tens of thousands of pages of documents from regulators, and then we looked very deeply at who's giving, who's getting money, and how they're spending it.
I want to read the powerful paragraph that kicks off your investigation. Oregon once aimed to be the greenest state in America. Its leaders adopted the nation's first bottle deposit. They controlled urban sprawl. They declared ocean beaches public property. But in the last 4 years, Oregon's most powerful industries have killed, weakened, or stalled efforts to deal with climate change, wolf recovery, disappearing bird habitat, cancer-causing diesel exhaust, dwindling groundwater, industrial air pollution, oil spill planning, and weed killers sprayed from helicopters. What changed Oregon? Money. Lots and lots of money. Rob, how much money are we talking about?
The individual donation to a lawmaker could be as small as a few $100s. Few $1,000s. In total, it is millions and millions of dollars that sitting lawmakers have taken from corporate interests in this state.
And we have a graphic that shows some of these numbers, and at the beginning of your report you have a by the numbers that has a lot more detail for folks to look at. But here are just a few things. Oregon is one of 5 states with no limits on campaign contributions. Per capita, when it comes to corporate giving, Oregon ranks #1 in the nation. And your report said corporate America, you talk about millions of dollars, gave Oregon state lawmakers $43 million between 2008 and 2016. Other donors like organized labor, individuals, single issue groups don't even come close to that number. So how does this money connect and correlate with our environmental regulations?
All of the political committees that are getting this money, all lawmakers committees, are called Friends of Kate Brown, Friends of Newt Bueller. And when you start making decisions, you oftentimes turn to your friends to see what they think. And I think that that's part of the endemic culture in Salem.
Let's give some examples of how this worked with some of our regulations. We'll start with diesel pollution. That's something they're talking about in Salem right now. Multnomah County has among the worst diesel exhaust in the country. It's like, I think, number 4 or so in the country. And we just did a report where some scientists were saying when they measured diesel exhaust, it was 10 to 20 times higher in the Portland area than the state considers safe to breathe. And I'm going to read a paragraph from your report on diesel pollution. Oregon's health target for reducing diesel pollution is 1/30th as stringent, 1/30th as stringent as in Washington or California, and Oregon is not even close to its goal. Diesel pollution contributes to what the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency estimates are 460 premature deaths a year in Oregon. Rob, it's so hard to believe in a city and state that likes to think it's green. We recycle, we compost, we bicycle, we love the outdoors. I was reminded in 2016, the city even banned any new fossil fuel plants from coming into the city. It doesn't seem to fit.
Oregon's been coasting on its reputation for a really long time. We passed, as a state, a number of groundbreaking environmental laws in the 1970s. Now when our leaders talk about whether the state's an environmental leader or not, they point to things like that. But they happened 50 years ago.
In your report on diesel pollution, you talked to a graduate of Lewis and Clark College, Dana Jones, and she moved here from Colorado because she thought that Oregon was this environmental utopia, she says. She wanted to settle here, but then her son started having breathing problems, and he ended up in the ER several times. And at first, the doctors didn't know why, right?
Yeah, she got called. Her son was just gasping for breath, and in an absolute panic, took him to the ER to try to diagnose what was going wrong. You know, eventually, as she was looking for jobs after she graduated from law school here, she decided to move to someplace that had cleaner air.
And they told her eventually that it was related to the diesel exhaust. You talked to her. We have a little bit of that interview where she talks about the pollution, how it affected her son. And then when she advocated, she went to the legislature, advocated for clean air, for better diesel regulations. This is what she says, lawmakers, this is how they reacted. Let's listen.
And they were like, oh, you know, lots of people have problems with the diesel from these areas. So they're like, he's probably just having an environmental reaction to large amounts of pollution. It's so obvious. We have some of the worst air in the country, and it's not enough to motivate these folks who talk about how green we are all the time to actually do something. And it blows my mind.
What is keeping lawmakers from passing stricter regulations when it comes to diesel? I think this is the 4th time they're considering a bill.
The trucking and construction lobbies are extremely strong, and they give a lot of money to everybody from the governor to representatives and senators. California has pushed to phase out the dirtiest trucks and construction equipment, and Oregon has sat on its hands. And investigations we've done have found that that's turned Oregon into a dumping ground for high-polluting, unwanted trucks from California.
So they're all coming here to Oregon. So now the House, they're considering a bill, HB 2007, for stricter regulations. What do you think is going to happen with that one?
Well, that's a great question. They've considered bills like this for years, and they end up gutting them and punting them to the next session over and over and over
Or phasing in the
again.
regulation for 10 years.
They just haven't acted. They just haven't acted. They had a bill in the last session to decide whether to accept the VW money from the pollution settlement and include some kind of phase out of high polluting construction equipment and trucks, and they gutted it.
Well, we'll see what happens this time around. Another example in the Dalles, and you did a whole report on this, looking at pollution in the Dalles and the stench from a railroad tie plant that emits an odor that smells like mothballs. The current owner is Ameritise, and it uses creosote to treat the ties, which is completely legal, but you found the pollutant drove 20 people to leave their homes. And KGW did an investigation in 2016, and we talked with resident Christina Cronkrite, whose son was 4 years old at the time. They lived above the plant, and she said the smell gave her migraines and made her feel weak. Let's listen to what she said.
It's gotten to the point where we really don't go outside to play unless we leave town. It's just surreal. The experience has been completely surreal. Like, I never knew anything like this could ever happen in a town.
How has the DEQ allowed this to persist?
It's really interesting. After that story ran on KGW, we got records showing how one lawmaker, Representative John Huffman, a Republican who represented the Dalles, 59% of the money that he raised in his career came from corporations. Just a few $1,000 from town residents and small donors. And he intervened with the Department of Environmental Quality, with the governor's office, saying that the issues that you all raised in that story really weren't that big of a deal. And really the DEQ should take it easy on that company, and they did. They excluded the public from negotiations about a deal to fix it, and he's a guy who'd taken money from the railroad who intervened on its behalf.
And what's the situation now? Has it changed?
The day that we published a story about it, the Department of Environmental Quality announced that it was going to be cracking down on air pollution from the plant and potentially doing things that it could have done 3, 4, 5 years ago.
And we'll talk a little bit more about reaction to your story in a moment. How much pressure are Oregon lawmakers under to raise all this cash?
There is an absolute arms race for competitive seats. Seats for the House of Representatives, every 2 years folks run. Competitive races now upwards of $1 million. So lawmakers we talked to said, you know, the day that the session ends, people are saying, when is your first fundraiser going to be?
Governor Brown's talking about campaign finance reform. It's always been in this state struck down by the courts as a matter of free speech. Do you think we're going to see campaign finance reform? Other states have managed to do it.
We're keeping a really close eye on that. The legislature could refer a question to voters. They say that they're going to amend the state's constitution to make it legal to limit campaign contributions. They haven't voted to do that yet, and so we're keeping a close eye to see whether they follow through on that.
After doing this report, do you think it would make a difference in the environmental regulations?
Oregon in 1996 limited donations, and they plummeted. The floor came out of it, and so donation limits absolutely can have an effect on the amount of money that's coming into the state's political system.
So you mentioned one result of your report. What other reaction have you gotten?
It's been really quiet among state lawmakers. They haven't had a lot to say about it. The reaction, though, from the readers of the newspaper has been absolutely overwhelming. I've been a journalist for 20 years, and I've never gotten more feedback about a series of stories than I have about this one. Hundreds of people absolutely outraged that this is the way that their state works.
I think it was pretty revealing. I think people are surprised, especially the reputation that this state has. Is there anything coming up next?
We're going to keep looking at this. Absolutely, absolutely. This has been, you know, an ongoing effort for a long time for us, and we're going to be keeping an eye on all of these bills and what the state does with campaign finance limits going forward.
We'll have to tell people that I've just scratched the surface on a very thorough and revealing report. So if you'd like to read the full report, I hope you will. It's worth reading. We have links on kgw.com, also on OregonLive.com. Rob Davis, thank you for joining us from the Oregonian. Also, thanks to my first guest, Kaya Sand from Street Roots. And we'll see you next week for Straight Talk. Have a great week.